Okay, and here we have Kaytlyn Gerbin. Thanks so much for joining us on the Train Right podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's really awesome to get to talk to you from across the world.
I know. So, well, tell us where you are in the world right now.
I am in Issaquah, Washington, which is about 15 miles outside of east of Seattle.
Okay. So I feel like we're kind of in similar climates though, at least maybe. Like in the Alps in France, I think Pacific Northwest in the US. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we've actually been really lucky to have a few weeks of really abnormally nice weather for spring. So I've been like, I mean, it's been a blessing and a curse at the same time because it's always easier to stay inside and get work done and be productive inside the house when it's rainy and gross outside. But we've had like really pretty nice and warm, sunny weather, which is a nice treat, I guess.
Oh yeah. I know I actually had to escape down south to get a little bit more of that nice weather. Kind of reminds me of Colorado. So I've been grateful for that too. But so a couple things, like we're new teammates. So you recently joined the North Face team this year.
Yeah,
Well,
I did,
last
and I'm super excited about that. I couldn't be more stoked to be on the team and be I guess be able to call myself a teammate with people like you.
Yeah, I know. I'm so excited. Actually, we met. I believe the first time I met you, you were running a race. I believe it was the Bear 2018.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That might have been.
I remember this because I was pacing my coach, Adam St. Pierre, and I was
Uh-huh.
just, I was running again after like all my injuries and stuff, and I was like just so psyched to be there. I was like crewing all night, and I was gonna like pace him for I don't know how many miles, but I remember seeing you because you were obviously, well, yeah, you were ahead of him. And I remember I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's Kaytlyn, she's so badass." And I remember, like, just, like, high-fiving you. I think at the end of the race, I was like, because 'cause I'm so awkward, like, nervously was like, "Oh, good job," because I like, yeah.
You mean you were awkward to give me a high five? That seems like it's backwards.
No, no, it's true. It's like it's how I was because I had never I still haven't run my first 100-mile race, but I remember like I really wanted to kind of test myself at the longer distances and I was just doing that. So I really obviously still do think like you're a completely badass athlete. So I was like super stoked when you're on the North Face team too.
Oh, cool. That's awesome.
Little tidbit there. I remember that. But so I mean, speaking of like training outside when it's raining, you had to train through probably a pretty crappy winter season because earlier this year, I mean, yeah, I mean, you were one of the few athletes who's actually been able to race this year, but you did the Coastal Challenge in Costa Rica,
Yep.
and you had to train through the winter for that.
Yes. Yeah. And every year that I make this decision, I tell myself this is going to be the last year that I do an early season race just because it can be so brutal sometimes. But especially given the situation, obviously, I'm super happy that I made the call I did to do some early season racing. But yeah,
Yeah.
winter here in the Northwest is can be pretty tough to train through. There's a lot of I don't know. It just really like mentally challenges you, I think, to get outside because for a lot of us, you're usually running in the dark in the morning or in the evenings after work, and we don't. I mean, we have daylight here, obviously, but usually, in some parts of the winter, it's not really getting bright until 8, and then it starts getting dark at 4. And we have a lot of gray, cloudy, overcast, kind of rainy days. And so a lot of
Yeah.
times, even in the mornings and the evenings, it never really gets very bright. So there just can be a lot of darkness, and it's also everything is wet and soggy. So it can be tricky sometimes
Yeah.
to just get out day after day and train through that. But on the flip side, we also have like such amazing, cool, like just deep dark forests here, and sometimes like having that kind of moody northwest weather where it's just fog that's seeping in and out of all these old growth trees and bright green moss, and it's a little bit muddy and soggy and slippery, and you kind of like once you get in it you really love it and you don't want to be anywhere else. So it can be really really fun at the same time.
Oh, man, see, this is actually the first year that I've experienced something like that because living in Colorado, I mean, we just have, like, this dry, arid climate, and usually it's just, it's pretty s it's snowy and cold, but in the springtime, we have, like, ice season or, like, mud season, but, um, yeah, this was my first time kind of training in a similar atmosphere, and, like, yeah, I actually was thinking of you because I was like, "Ah, yeah, like, I've got some newfound respect for, like, training in the Pacific Northwest," and
Mhm.
but I mean, we're gonna touch on just a little bit of like obviously like the racing and stuff because I'm just curious. Like you got into the sport in 2014?
That yeah, 2014 was my first 50K, and that was my first trail race too.
Yeah, okay, so it's like similar timelines. I was about the same. Like 2014 was my first like trail running season and
Oh,
um
cool.
yeah, it's
I
so
think we're
crazy.
about the same age
We
too,
like
so that
took off
means
the
we
deep.
both yeah.
Yeah, how old are you?
I'm turning 31
No,
at the
wait,
end
how
of April.
okay, ooh, happy birthday.
Yeah, thank
Early
you.
birthday.
Yeah, in like 2 weeks.
Awesome, yes, I'm
Close enough. My
oh, cool, yeah.
for some
So we
reason, like, my Ultra sign up and my year like, my ITRA, everywhere says I'm 31 already. I don't know why, but, like, looked at that the other day because I was trying to check if the race statuses were updated, and I'm like, "Oh, why am I not 31 yet? Come on."
that's
But
so
I'm
funny.
close.
I wonder if they say I'm 32. That would be oh, man. Yeah, because my birthday is August 26th. So,
Okay.
maybe they already have it updated. But so this is actually what I kind of wanted to get into because your first race is in 2014, first 50K. That's about when mine was. And I didn't have the courage to try a 100-mile race, well, almost a 100-mile race until last year at TDS. Granted, some things happened, in the interim. Maybe could have tried it earlier, but when was your first 100-mile race and kind of like into the longer races?
So, yeah, my first 100 was Pine to Palm in
Mhm.
Ashland, Oregon, and that was in 2016.
Okay.
So,
So
and ok I mean, like, so the funny thing is I think, like, I wouldn't have done that race if it wasn't for, a little bit of a spark of craziness and a little bit of stupidity at the same time, which is maybe how everyone signs up for these races, but
yeah. Well,
I
what
at the time was in grad school and
Mhm.
had been doing a few at that point I had done I think I ran my first 50-mile and 100K, but was mostly doing 50K races. And
Mhm.
I had just set out in my mind, like, I'm way too busy right now. There's no way I have time to train for 100. So I kind of just said to myself, I'm not going to do this until after I graduate, which, would have been, I was in like a 6 year long program. So that would have been a while. And so I had heard of actually, I think it was through the Ginger Runner, Ethan Newberry and Kim Newberry, who live in Seattle now. So they had done a video on the Squamish 50-50. So this is one of
Mhm.
Gary Robbins' races. That's up in Squamish, British Columbia. And it's essentially a 50-mile race one day with a 50K the following day. And there's a crazy amount of vert, really technical mountain bike, kind of techie trails. And I, for some reason, thought that, well, I don't have time to train for 100, but I have time to train for this. So I'm going to just like make that happen because to me it seemed less intimidating, I guess, because it was essentially two back-to-back really long runs and I was already kind of doing that style of training for a lot of my 50Ks. And it also kind of suited my lifestyle, which was a lot of pretty much all of my midweek training at that time was just running back and forth to lab from my house, which was
Mhm.
3 miles each way. So I was running not very much, but consistently double, 3 miles one way, 3 miles home. And sometimes I would kind of lengthen that just to make a longer route on the way home. And then on the
Mhm.
weekends, I'd go and try to that's when I would get most of my miles just because that's the time that I had available to do that.
Mhm.
And so I kind of thought that, okay, this is, I can't run 100, but maybe I could do this. That would be a really cool challenge. And then in the process of training for that race, it was in the summer, and my husband and I were out in the North Cascades, and we just had clipped off this like epic route that of like this 40-mile. adventure route basically that is usually a backpacking route, and it was one of these things that I had been on my list for a long time, but I was like, well, I don't know when I'm going to have, 4 days to go backpack this loop. So, eventually the cool thing about ultra running is you just get to the point where you can do that kind of thing in a single day. So we did that and had plans to run the next day. And I just realized, I'm like, you know what? Like, there is no way that anyone training for 100 runs more than this. Like, this is like insane. Like, this is more than anyone would want to run. So I like told me, I was like laying in the tent that night and thinking like, okay, if I wake up tomorrow and we can do this run that we have planned tomorrow, and I feel okay, then I'm going to try to sign up for 100. And so I ended up signing up for Pine to Palm, which was 3 weeks after Squamish 50/50. And so I signed up for it, I think like a month and a half before the race. And it was just because I'm like, I feel like I'm as trained as I will ever be. I might as well try to do it. So I just didn't really know what I was doing, and signed up and jumped into it. So I'm so glad I did, but also like I don't really know what I was thinking.
Well, I mean, as a coach, yeah, it's true. It's like, I mean, people training for 100-mile races, they don't run more than like maybe like there's a 50-mile race like in a like a build up, but I mean, yeah, heck, I don't even have a lot of my athletes like do 50-mile races leading up to a 100K or a 100-mile race because sometimes again, they don't have time, just like you were saying. Um so and how did that first race go? Like did you like it?
Yeah, I actually loved it. I mean, it was hard. I had a lot of challenges and things that, just of course things are going to come up when you're doing that kind of a distance, and I also didn't really know what my body would do when I was out running for that long.
Yeah.
So, there are things to work through, but overall, like I had a really great experience, and really loved the distance, and ended up kind of feeling like maybe this is my thing. Like maybe this like long distance thing, like I really like this, and somehow I know I was tired at the end, but I didn't feel as tired as I thought I should, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, so I had a really good experience then, and was kind of at that point thinking like, okay, when am I going to do my next 100?
That is so awesome. That is so cool. Because like thinking about it, like I think some people really have a strong like positive feeling, or it takes like a long time to like for the for them to learn. Um,
Hmm.
but then from then it's like this is also one of these reasons why like I mean I admire you as an athlete because you kind of like you decided that this is the stuff that you're good at and you've pursued that. So I mean even last year, but now like you finished second on the Ultra Trail World Tour, and this year you also had a pretty strong start to it. What made you decide to not only like take that to the next level? I feel like it's one thing like racing 100-mile races, but then it's another thing racing like multiple long distance races in a year.
Yeah, that's a good question, a good point. I think like everyone is going to, respond differently to that distance, and I think for sure it would have been too much for me to jump into another long distance race soon after that first 100. So I know
Mhm,
I did Squamish 50/50, and then 3 weeks later was Pine to Palm. I don't
mhm,
know that that is the best approach, because that is pretty close. They were 3 weeks apart,
mhm,
and essentially during that 3 week time, I did almost zero running. I was out walking and just kind of active recovery, but I was definitely not doing any additional training during that time.
mhm,
And so actually, I've kind of taken that approach now for almost every year, where I've run 100. Um, I guess, well, actually, that my next 100 was Western States, so that's at the end of June. And then the follow that same year, so I ran Western States in June, and then I believe it was Cascade Crest, which was in August. So 2 months
mhm,
later, then I ran Cascade Crest, and then the same year or the following year, I did Western States, and then doubled up with Bear. And then
mhm,
last year, I was in Western States again and had planned to do UTMB, and ended up not doing that, and instead doing the Infinity Loop, which is a longer
hmm.
distance adventure too. But um,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think like part of it is that I'm really comfortable going into a race with a lot of training, and then being okay to turn the switch off, and and really, focus on recovery and not do a lot of training in between those that next race. And I think
Yeah.
you keep a pretty good baseline level of fitness. Like, you really don't lose that much, and you definitely don't need to be doing really long distance things during that time. It's just kind of more tuning. So I've in the past, especially with western states being early summer, I've taken then usually July to just kind of chill out, and then I'll focus on doing different kinds of adventures in the mountains. And then my training, normally for that second 100 is mostly based on just adventures that I'm planning, not any actual real focused um, heavy duty training, because I think I've been able to put the work in up front and then just kind of maintain it. And I don't know, like, it almost feels like cheating the system a little bit, because you're not doing a huge build up twice for 100. But I also feel like, you have to really respect your body, because after something like 100 miles, you might need, a month off of real training. And I think that's okay. And some people I've seen, like, especially when I was first starting the running, I would follow other runners who's like, yeah, okay, take 10 mile, 1 day off for every 10 miles. So after 100-mile, people will take 10 days off, or some people will take 2 weeks off. And I've found myself sometimes needing, like, I need like a month without training. Like, I'll go for a few jogs, but maybe I'm like not going to be doing any actual speed work or anything for a month or more after. And I think that's okay.
Oh man, I'm right there with you. Like I so many things that I love about this of what you just said. I mean, first of all, a lot of the things that I do, it's the same as like adventures. They really like something that like maybe more fuels my soul.
Yeah.
And I think it's so individual for people with recovery. And I don't think it's a bad thing for people. It's like if you know that you like the long distance stuff, like sure you can do multiple things in a year. It's just kind of like figuring out what works best for you from a recovery standpoint. And I actually think that that's super smart. Like, and maybe it is cheating the system, but I mean, detraining happens like way slower than you think it does. So it's
Uh-huh.
like you'd have to take a long time off of like doing zero activity before you even start to lose fitness. Like when I was injured, I was like reading these articles and like freaking out. And I think it takes like something like 21 days of like literally doing zero activity before you start to lose fitness. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm
I
good."
I would believe that. And also, like, I think you have a really interesting perspective on this, just coming back from injury, because it's like, no, after you take any length of time off, whether it's a week or a year, I think it always is going to be like
Yeah.
your gears are a little bit sticky getting back. But you just got to like step back and realize, like, okay, like, you just got to give your body a minute to figure out what's going on. And maybe that takes longer than other times, but I think just like trusting the process can be helpful.
Yeah. And so kind of like to not really switch gears, but this is something that I'm really happy that I have someone else. Like I feel like we've got pretty similar starts into the sport. Like I also started running when I was in graduate school, like squeezing in those long runs on the weekends. Like a lot of my training were like long adventure runs. But like when I did that first race and like kind of started getting into the whole like culture and scene of ultra running and racing, it was something that just like drew me to the sport and like drew me in and just kind of got me hooked. Like what did you feel when like that kept like drawing you back? Was it a sense of community? The fact of like working hard for something? Like what was it that made you kind of stick around and keep racing and training and being an ultra runner?
Yeah, I think it's a few things. Like, on one hand, it definitely was the community. I think the community is what kept me signing up for races and going back, because I met a few people at the first trail race that I did that then planted the seed for a bunch of other races in the area. So I just kind of started signing up for some of these local races, and it seemed like every race I went to, I saw another familiar face and I would meet 10 more people. And there's just this kind of like really low key community, come hang out with us vibe in the trail scene that I really loved. And I'd been running road marathons for a few years before this, and I had never really experienced that before. And so I didn't think that that kind of community aspect was really a part of running because I had never experienced it. And I
Mm,
think like, so signing up for the races, that definitely I think is a big part of it. But another thing is just like, and I'm sure you can appreciate this too, if a lot of your, runs and stuff are just big adventures and things, is that I was really like excited to start using running and my fitness to do bigger things in the mountains. And so it almost was like training and signing up for races was almost, especially at the beginning, like a way to hold myself accountable for actually doing the training, which
yeah.
usually was like something that was actually not really training, but instead like, oh yeah, like let's go do this 30-mile route we've always wanted to go backpack, but instead we'll just run it and call it a training run. So I think like that it's just like that's really I think even what keeps me in it now, despite that I've been doing more racing and stuff too, is just like it's so incredible what your body can do for you, when when you respect it and give it the training and the time and the recovery and stuff that it needs. And it's pretty cool to be able to go to see where your own 2 feet can take you. And races are definitely a way to do that. But I think that, especially those of us who have access to mountains or, I mean, even if you don't just want to go take a trip and go do something, there's so many amazing places to see. And when your body can suddenly be okay with moving for 12 hours or more,
Mm.
it just really opens up opportunities for different kinds of adventures in the mountains.
Yeah. Oh man, I can relate. That's exactly like it's like my favorite thing just to like I view it as playtime. It's like
Hmm.
playtime in the mountains, like these routes I want to do, and then it like doubles as okay, then I think I'm gonna be in pretty good shape for this race now. Like
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
like doubles is like training. But speaking about so being having like celebrating what your body can do, that it can be strong enough to do these like huge efforts in the mountains, take you to these amazing places and these like depths, and like in these lows and bring you out of into these extreme highs in races. Um Obviously when you got into running, you're pretty good at it, ultra running. And this is a conversation that I've really wanted to have with another female athlete is how was your road to being a sponsored athlete? Did you feel like it was maybe a little bit riddled? I recently wrote an article not too long ago. It was Women's History Month not too long ago, but and people can look this up. It was for Runner's World, kind of highlighting. I think the title is that Hillary Allen wants more women to get into running and outdoor sports, and it was kind of a call to action for people like bringing up the topic about women in outdoor sports and what that looks like. And I'm curious. We've been in the sport of ultra running for the same amount of time. Um, how has your path to sponsorship been, I don't know, influenced by your gender, if at all?
Oh wow, this is like a good topic. I yeah, it's I don't, I there's a lot of things that are coming to my mind, so maybe we can just like chat about some of this stuff a little
Speak them
bit.
up.
But um, my road to getting an initial sponsorship, I think, was ultimately, I don't know, it's really hard, and it was filled with a lot of um, self doubt and
Mm,
lack of understanding what my value was, but also not really knowing how to advocate for myself in that way because I didn't personally really know any sponsored female athletes.
yeah.
And, there's just such a black box about what sponsorship even means, and no one really is talking about it or is able to talk about it.
Mm,
And so I definitely like, I think this is like maybe brings up a whole other topic we can get into a little bit later, but I think it was really hard for me, especially as I was starting to do really well locally, but also starting to travel and do some bigger races and do well there, that I just, it was hard seeing maybe myself like get these really killer performances and put up times that I thought were really good, that I was really proud of, but then not really get any recognition from that, from the sport, or
mhm,
from brands. And especially I think that was really hard when I would see other young young athletes like myself, or relatively new athletes kind of break out into the sport and then get into the limelight really quickly. And I
Yeah.
think like, that's something that I definitely struggled with. And I think, it's easy to be jealous. And I think that was part of it. But I think it also is just like not really understanding what the rules of the sport are. And maybe those rules not really being fair and even, in the first place is part of that problem. But it was definitely definitely hard. And I did actually end up, um, where I was working with La Sportiva for, I think 2 years, and that was great. I really enjoyed working with them. They were awesome, but even getting to that, I had to advocate for myself a lot, and I think that's something that is never easy to do, whether you're asking for a sponsorship or for a promotion at your job or for even just like recognition for work that you're doing. Like, I think a lot of us probably have lots of stories about how we struggle with that. So I don't know. It
Yeah.
it it's
I
it's
mean, I was gonna
hard.
add something like, no, I mean, I think it's the same for me as well. Like advocating for yourself, it's like a good message, right? And maybe some people, regardless of gender, are able to do that more than others. But I also think like a big something that I struggled with is like I'm a very logical person, like a black and white, and this is my downfall sometimes, but like for a science, I'm looking for a right or wrong answer, like a yes or a no. Like I've eliminated the variables, and like I'm going to get a clear answer at the end of my experiment.
Yeah.
That's what I also like about running. Like you're running the same course, and really you're running against the clock. Like you're running against other people, but like literally it's pretty cut and dry. Who wins, who loses, who has a good time, who doesn't. And so to me, running is the absolute like it tells you like if you win or lose, it's pretty clear cut. And so to do well in early races like yourself, right, early in your career and even now, and not get the recognition, it's a bit confusing because then if someone else of maybe a different gender, like a young gun on the scene of like a fast guy running a fast race in a fast time, he'll immediately get like sponsored and picked up. And then, where I feel like that wasn't the same for, women that I've seen in the sport, like laying down really, really, really consistent times, like time in and time out for races. And yes, to me, that's something that it doesn't make sense all the time.
Yeah, and I think when that's kind of your introduction to it, it makes it really intimidating, and I think it took a really long time for me to recognize that I was worthy of a sponsorship. And
Mhm.
even beyond that, like it's still like I'm still learning now, like, that I can ask for those things and I should be asking for those things. And that, I think it's just like, the more we can talk about this is good. It's really honestly like surprising to me to hear that like you also had the same kind of a struggle, because I've seen you as someone who is just like dominant in the sport, and you've got I feel like you've really like you've gotten enough attention where like when I was first starting in the sport, I was like, oh, who's this Hillary Allen chick? She looks awesome, right? So I think like, even without knowing it, like you're having an influence on the rest of us with this. But it's just interesting for me to hear that like you who have, you know, been like just such a stronghold in the sport for a while, that you also kind of had these kinds of struggles with sponsorship and figuring out what kind of sponsorship you're even worthy of, or what you should be asking for. Like, can you even like be an athlete? Can you call yourself a professional athlete? What do you need to do that? Like,
Yeah, and oh man, it's been such a struggle too because, and then, like and I'm not saying obviously like I worked from North Face from the very beginning, and this was also like kind of an internal struggle too, not with my main sponsor North Face, but just like in the world of sports in general. I feel like it's also hard like with the big brand like North Face to be compared to, like climbers and skiers and alpinists and all this other stuff. So it's like, okay, like where does running and ultra running come into it, because it's a relatively new sport in in North America at least. But yeah, I definitely struggle with this stuff, and maybe it was like internal and like I had when I started running, it was in graduate school, and I literally walked away from my PhD. I graduated with a master's because I like saw this opportunity of like, okay, I want to take a chance on this, and like, but I mean, I was living out of
That's crazy. That's
I
so
was
awesome.
living my car. Like, I was like, I don't have a place to live. I literally put my stuff in storage and like moved to Europe so I could actually afford to like live and race in Europe because like I wasn't getting paid because I wasn't asking for that sponsorship. I wasn't like, I thought that like being a trail runner, you kind of like are this like vagabond, like dirt bagger, like, and, like, it
Mhm.
took me a while also to figure out and to like ask for, okay, like, my value as a as a woman winning these races or podiuming in these races, like that's a story, like that's just as important as a guy winning the race. Like I think it's sometimes hard because like maybe I mean, even if I've won a race, I haven't won a race outright. The closest I've ever come was third place. But like
Yep.
I but
What race was that?
that was the big actually, that was my first 50-mile race. It was the
Wow.
Bighorn 50. And,
That's
the funny story was that actually my coach now, Adam St. Pierre, I was like in my recollection of the race, I was like 30 seconds behind him, but I was a couple minutes behind him, but like, yeah, I finished 3rd overall in that
oh,
race,
that's awesome. A couple of
behind
minutes in a 50-mile race is basically a couple seconds. Like, I think we could just agree that you were very freaking close. Like
That's what I think too. But so I mean, there is the issue too. Is like I was thinking, it's like, oh, okay, like we're not winning these races outright, but like I mean, look at Courtney Dauwalter now. Like we've got these like women who are racing and placing regularly in the top 10. Like I've finished in the top 10 in certain races. But there's always that thing. It's like, well, okay, for sponsorship attention, like you're finishing kind of in the middle of the men's pack. So
mhm.
there's this argument there. But I mean, so maybe it took me a while to like get confidence to be like, okay, well, no, like this is actually like important.
Yeah.
Um,
I know, like, for myself, and I'm not sure if maybe you had a similar thing for a while since you were also in grad school, but I found myself a lot like rationalizing the level of support I was asking for, given that I also had another career. And I would kind of
yep.
tell myself, like, look, like, sure, I'm not really getting all that much, or I feel like maybe I could be getting more, but at the same time, like, I don't really have the time to write a ton of blog posts. I don't really want to spend a ton of time on social media. Like I have another job. This is my main thing and I'm running for fun. But I think like I didn't realize really until recently that like no, like even if I don't need that per se, like I still deserve it and I should be willing to ask for it. It doesn't matter what else I'm doing with my time. I think like recognizing that you're worthy of asking for things is a I mean, it just takes a while to do that, especially I think when you have, another thing, like another aspect of your career that you're also really passionate about that seems like, oh, well, it's just easy, I think, to like diminish your own value in another aspect of your life when you have something else that you're putting on more of a pedestal at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I also think it's like, like justifying these things away regardless. Like we're in the midst of kind of this idea of like, okay, well, there's this movement happening where women or like groups of women are kind of demanding more equal treatment at races. Like I mean, it wasn't even that long ago when even when I was racing in Europe, it was back in 2018. That's only 2 years ago, where there were certain races that actually weren't even like offering prize money for the top 10 women, or they'd only recognize the top 5. Or even in like when the women's competitive field, they had just as many as elites and competing. And I think like if that's already kind of an part of the culture that you're coming into, it's then hard to ask for compensation from a sponsor, or to feel that you're even like deserving of it. So it's like it's
Yeah.
kind of a catch too. Like there is this huge welcoming community. I mean, it's what brought you into the sport, it's what brought me into the sport and has kept me here. But it's also this idea of like, okay, well, if we want to take this, it's kind of like a professional level, like we're all training our butts off. Like relatively speaking, I'm training just as much as like a guy running this 100-mile race. Like, so, why isn't my time
Mhm.
compensated as
Mhm.
equally as that? And yeah, it's funny. I mean, this isn't by any means trying to be like a rant or like excluding men or saying that like, people are doing things wrong. It's just, I mean, and things are changing, right? Races are changing their policies. I think they're opening their eyes and like, they're hearing the side of things. It's like, okay, like this makes sense, so we're going to change it. But I also think it's like we need to continue these conversations because it's not perfect yet. And
Mhm.
it's it's also just like, okay, well, there's like there have been clear discrepancies and like clear differences.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah, and I mean, things take a while to change, and even if they are like changing up front, and you talked to Gina Lucrezi about this recently on your one of your other episodes with kind of Trail
mhm,
Sisters and their guidelines for races, which I think is awesome. It still
yeah.
takes a while. So if you think of like you and I first ran a trail race 5 years ago, and we're
Mhm,
now only really like this is like probably one of the first conversations I've really had openly about some of these issues and like my own struggles of recognizing sponsorship value and stuff coming into the sport. And I think like what I've been noticing that I think is still happening a lot is that we're not as good at giving recognition to podium females at
mm,
local races. And I think
mhm,
that that's a problem because everyone starts somewhere and everyone starts local. And I think of myself when I was, hitting the podium and winning some local races. But I always still felt kind of like whether this was external or internal, and probably a lot of it was internal, I was definitely like diminishing my own accomplishments at those races because I would be like 30 minutes behind the men or however far
yeah,
behind the men. And um,
mhm,
also at a lot of these races, like as a woman, whether you're winning or third or fifth or whatever, you're generally coming into the finish line amidst other men who are running.
yeah,
And, I think it's awesome to go and race the men. Like we should definitely be doing that. But also like that, there is a women's race going on too. And so I think like I definitely would feel sometimes coming across the finish line and there'd be a ton of people there watching because there's other race distances and stuff coming on, and I would come through and people would have no idea that I just won the
yeah,
race. And like,
mhm,
that's okay. I'm not doing it for the external recognition from everyone there, but at the same time, how can we start to really appreciate and value our own accomplishments in a way that's worthy of like, you know, putting ourselves out there to ask for more media attention or sponsorship recognition or support from races or any of these other things. Like how can we start doing that if we can't even really do that at a local level? And I think
yeah,
I'm worried because I've seen some, just in the Northwest, we've got some real crushers out here and a lot of people like women who are just like really crushing the local racing scene. And I just see like there's a gap of like how are they going to move beyond that, because we need some, but like I think like unless we actually do something, like people don't really realize like, hey, like you are dominating these races, like you should really consider like, you know traveling to a race or doing some of these other things or something. But I think like even like if we can't really have that celebration at somebody's finish line or podium, then that makes that a whole lot harder because you don't even really realize that, hey, this is a big deal, I'm doing something awesome here.
yeah. I mean, you nailed it right on the head, and I'm just like, it's the same thing as like I think about my entry into the sport, and I was lucky. I had a strong woman role model. I mean, first of all, I was raised in a family where, like, I have an older sister, and like her and I like completely different things, but like, I was told by both my mom and my dad that like, okay, it's not an issue if you're a girl and you like to play in the dirt and like, get dirty and not play with dolls, whatever, every stereotypical thing you can think of for like a girl versus a boy. Like, I was super quote unquote tomboy. And I mean, I hate that word, but still, that's how I was raised. So I think like someone like me coming into a sport and then like choosing to pursue a career in sport is, maybe not as far fetched. And I also had a strong female role model who was a professional athlete and she was like leading the way, telling me it was possible to have, and she also had another career, but she was also a sponsored runner. So I mean, I think about that too for the next generation, and like also just people currently, because yeah, in Colorado there's so many crushers, and it's like,
Mhm.
and then also here in Europe, like you meet these like literally this like this old French woman who's like, hiking 10 miles a day with 1,000 meters of elevation gain just to get her eggs in the morning. Like, what? Like, it's like ridiculous. But, how then can you make the jump from, okay, like, you're crushing it at this level, but like this can actually like go into more opportunities for someone. It's like, I mean, I love traveling and racing and meeting new people, and also like, challenging myself in these new ways. But like I want that for more people, like to experience the same thing.
Mhm.
And I think you're right. It's like it's an issue of, and in the episode with Gina for Trail Sisters, like, she has some sort of standards for like Trail Sister approved for like certain races, how, the women's field and women in general can feel more kind of like a part of things in a race. But I also think that there's more things that that are important for our community to kind of to do and to embrace. And like, I mean, you made such a great point. I mean, I'll mention two things like TDS last year. So I was racing head to head with Audrey Tengay, and we were literally in a 145-kilometer race. We finished 10 minutes apart, and
Mhm.
that's nothing. And so UTMB, the live coverage, it was awesome. They had like a designated film crew for the women's race and for the men's race. But during and this women's race, for the first half, maybe more, there was like three of us that were just like battling back and forth, like we're within 2 minutes of each other. And it wasn't until like the last half of the race, and then the last little bit, that there was some separation. But when I entered the streets of Chamonix, it was empty.
Mm.
Like there there was no one there. And that was like from, basically the design of the course itself, like because we started at 4 in the morning. So that 4 in the morning start time accommodated for when the men would be finishing. And that was like prime time in Chamonix. But when the women were finishing, which was a couple hours later, like people were already to bed. And
Yeah.
so like, that's one way to change it. Um, but then the other thing I wanted to mention is I mean, your experience with Western states. Like you finished second. What year was that?
2 years ago.
Yeah,
20 2018.
and then
2019
last year
or 2018.
y-
Sorry.
wait, I don't know. We're gonna
Whatever. Some time ago.
but then and then last year you had like this sprint finish like at the
Oh
end of
god.
100. But again, like there's these races that are happening, but literally for the title of Western states, anything you look up, like any articles that were, mentioned about this were about, obviously the men's race was great. Jim Walmsley setting the course record, but like that's all you read about it. You don't read about the other like headlines and like the battles that were actually happening out there on the women's field.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the race finish, my experiences in finishing a lot of races echo kind of what you said about like TDS of coming in and basically the crowds have cleared, like there's no one. And and like even at big races a lot of times that's the case because of these races of the timing. Usually I think it's the starting time
Yeah.
where the women finishers are usually coming in after everyone's left. And like I for a long time, I kind of like laughed about it. I'm like, I don't know. It's just such an like people are like, what is it like winning a 100-mile race? I'm like, it's really anticlimactic. Like you finish and there's literally nothing there. Like your your super groggy crew who's been up all night is there, and like that's in the race director, and like that's it. There's nothing else. And I know like I'm sure there's a lot of like that isn't necessarily a female experience. Um, there's lots of whatever lots of different race finish experiences, but like I've had that experience so many times, and I think like I usually think it's fine, but I think this conversation too is helping me realize like it's not okay, it's not okay, because like we know that it could very easily be different, and like maybe they don't need to change the starting time of races, but doing a better job projecting like when they expect the first male and female finishers to come in, and highlighting more about both aspects of the male and female race, and also highlighting, I think, cases where women are racing the men. Like, I think there are a lot of really good stories there that could be highlighted, that, are sometimes missed out. And it shouldn't necessarily, especially at a really big stage race, it shouldn't feel anticlimactic to come in on the podium.
Yeah, I agree. And like, oh man, I've had this experience like multiple times too. You're right. Like from a crew standpoint of like finishing a 100-mile race, it's like it is kind of like it's super anticlimactic. But you're right. Like there's been multiple races where I've come through and like literally they've been like rushing to put the finishing line tape up, and I'm like, come on, guys, like you know. And
Yeah.
it's not, and even in that, like I said, it's not to say that it's that oh, I would just like sitting here complaining and blah blah blah. Like this, we are super fortunate obviously to get these opportunities to race and do these tough races. And even with like kind of the sour experiences at a race like TDS or even in western states and things like this, like races are trying to correct it, right? So like I said, TDS, like they had a designated men's and women's like camera film, that like camera crew that was like following around the leaders. So, and they were live streaming it. So like my parents got to watch the action unfold, which is like insane because like, it made ultra running interesting. But I think that this can be taken and applied to even like the local races, because when people first, like, how cool would it have been like in like in your first 50K experience where like your race result was like just as celebrated as the guy that won it. Like there are
Mhm.
certain races that do this super well. But I think again, like to have the sport continue to grow, for participation to increase on both the men and women's side, like that's a really cool way to get more people in it and like become invested in ultra running, because I mean, you work really hard to get to the start line and you fight for every mile sometimes to get to the finish. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, yeah, we're in this other, like it's so cool to like talk about this stuff with someone else who's kind of like experienced the same thing. But I mean, we're also in this, like we're kind of in the middle of this movement of like women supporting women. And I love to see it. It's like with Trail Sisters, and also just like I'm super happy to be a part of the team like North Face, like where they have, this idea of like basically highlighting the strong women that they have on their team, in hopes of showcasing them to basically show the next generation of girls it's like they have a mentor to look up to and be like, okay, she can do it, she looks like me, she does stuff that I like to do, like I can be like her. So I think like that's a start. I mean, I want to mention basically one, the other race that you got to run this year. And they had a hashtag for that race. It was called "The Future is Female." And why was this, like what kind of did they do to that was different from other years and other races that you
Yeah,
haven't seen before?
yeah, I'm glad you brought this up because I wanted to mention this, that, so at Trans Gran Canaria last month, they had a basically at the start of the race, so there, well, let me back up. As you said, their hashtag, kind of theme for the year was "Trail is Female," and there are a bunch of kind of little things that they did throughout, the pre-race briefing, in terms of bringing more elite women into the field. So they had a really, really strong women's field. They changed the logo of the race, which is normally kind of a silhouette of a guy with his arms up, and they added a ponytail and made it a woman, and like, so like that little gestures like that, I think are really awesome. But one of the biggest moves that they did, which was super powerful, which was at the beginning, everyone's kind of standing in the starting corrals, and there's music and lights, and we're on the beach, and there's kind of a lot of commotion, but there's a lot of media and press there. Like basically the entire um, start area is just like packed with media. And generally, as with most races, like it's the men who are standing up at the front who are in all of those starting photos, and even just like
Mhm.
kind of the chit chat and the banter, between competitors and racers. A lot of those photos and candid photos and stuff usually come from the men, because that's who you can see, because everyone else is kind of packed in there. And so, before the race started, they made an announcement to bring all of the females to the front, for a photo. And so we all kind of like, we're like, okay, okay. So we all kind of like work our way to the front. The men step back because they announced for the men to step back and all the women, elite women, to come to the front. So we took photos, and that was really cool because actually, like, even just standing there and getting a photo with all of us women there and looking around and seeing the rest of the women's field was really empowering and really cool to be like, okay, we have our little bit of our moment here. And just naturally, after the photo is taken, everyone just kind of starts to step back and disappear into the crowd because that's what that's what we do. And they stop. It's like, no, 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 women stay on the front. And I actually like like people were like noticeably like a little bit uncomfortable about that. Like, really? What? We're in the front? But yeah, but like we've got Pau Capel and Dylan Bowman and Pablo Villa. They're behind us. They're going to trample us, right? And no, they're actually they're not going to trample you. You'll be fine. But it was a little bit of like this kind of weird moment of like, okay, we're actually standing at the front. Okay, I guess we're starting at the front. And I cannot tell you like how amazing that feeling was when the race started, and it was just like the open beach with, I mean, I don't know, like hundreds, probably don't know if there was hundreds, but let's say it seemed like hundreds of people with cameras just lining the initial, kind of takeoff spot of the race. And I've never had that feeling before of starting at a big race and just seeing an open space ahead of me.
Yeah.
And that's something that like was, it seems like such a minor detail, but like there was so much energy that I was feeling from having that experience. Like I can't, like I almost was like crying because I'm like, it was like tears of happiness. I'm like, but also kind of sad because like I can't believe that I never even knew what this feeling was like. Like I didn't even know I was missing this. And so that kind of energy that, the men who end up on the podium are feeling as they're starting the race, like meanwhile I'm in the back, trying not to trip over people. I mean, of
Mhm.
course, like literally everyone else who's running the race is having that same experience. So I think it's really easy to put yourself into that category and be like, okay, yeah, well, all of us are experiencing this together. But
Yeah.
there are that group of people at the front who aren't experiencing that, and I think that was just a really powerful, like, cool moment just to have that kind of energy. And I really hope that I get to have that experience again. And it might be easy for someone to say, "Well, just make it happen. Just go stand in the front." And I don't think it's that easy. And I don't know if you've done that before, tried to make your way to the front of a front of a race before. But I've definitely heard of other elite women who have tried to do that and end up kind of getting their way elbowed back, and then they end up trying to purposely beat the people who who were forcing ahead of them. But I don't. I
Yeah,
mean, have you ever had that kind of experience of like standing in the front of a big race like that?
so, like, the smaller local races, but never at a, I mean, like, actually, with TDS, I think I was kind of on the front line because they kinda did the same thing, like, everyone
Mhm.
was kind of there, but I think I was, like, not absolutely first, I was, like, in the second because, in Euro races, they always, like, start super fast, so I was like,
Mhm.
I don't wanna get old." But I mean, yeah, I mean, I remember, like, exactly experiencing what you were saying of, like, like, taking a step back, like, even it like, sometimes even when I look across the starting chute, like, they have, like, the elite corral, and then, like, when they separate the 2, like, there's all these, like, people that are coming up to the start, and, like, these men that are, like, pushing their way past me, and I'm, like, looking at them, I'm just like, "Okay, but, like, dude, I can," like, "I'm pretty sure I'm gonna beat you at the end of this,
Yep.
like, why are you trying to, like, go ahead of me now?" But no, I mean, I can imagine because it's like sometimes it's scary. Like at a race like Transvolcania, I remember it's like you have to kind of race to this like single track trail, and it's like
Uh-huh.
complete mayhem. And you have to worry about tripping. I know like one year, like Emily Forsberg, she like fell in the beginning 500 meters and like cut her hand really bad and ended up having to like come out of the race and uh for that reason. And yeah, I mean, it would be an amazing feeling to have like at a huge race like that. And I was so happy to see that. And I think it's a long race, like a lot can happen, but I think like, and maybe people were criticizing the race's decision to do that because they're like, well, like obviously, like the men beat the women at like ultimately at the end. You beat a lot of them winning
Mhm.
that race. Um, but still, I think it's more of the symbolism and like what it represents to be like, okay, like, yeah, like this field is here too. Like they're competing, like they're just as important to highlight as the men.
Mhm.
And you know, I've also had like so many experiences of, in like even like finishing a race or like, race photos. It's like where I'm never alone, like there's
Yeah.
like
Yep.
someone with me and I'm like, nah, who is this guy? Like, get out of the shot.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's like all of my finished photos. There was even a finished photo when I was at what was this, 2 years ago, I think, the Trail World Championships, which was in Spain. I ran and I think I finished 10th. I was so
Mm.
excited, but there was, there was someone proposing on the finish line as I was coming through, and I just was like I almost ran into him because there's like you have to run up and then down because that was like where they get the good photos. I guess I don't know. So they had like the finish line actually elevated, and so I like can't come over sprinting, just like wrecked and so stoked that I had this big finish, and I like almost ran into people that were getting engaged, and like that was lovely, but also like I think my mom was more upset about me than not because she was watching on the live stream, be like, get out of the way, but
Oh my god. Oh, that's so funny.
um
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, but, like,
Oh,
the starting line thing, I think, like, knowing now what that experience is like, I'm going to really try to hold myself accountable to, like, pushing my way towards the front more, and even if it makes me uncomfortable to do that, I'm gonna try to do it, and I'm also gonna try to bring other women with me because I think,
yeah.
like, I would be unlikely if I hadn't had this experience, I would be unlikely to do that by myself. But if someone else, or like if I was with you on the starting line, you're like, Kaytlyn, get up here, let's go to the front. I'd be like, okay, I guess we're doing it. Um, so I would try to do that. And I think like you mentioned this thing of kind of like women supporting women. And I think that is really important. But I think like another, I don't know, maybe dark side of that is that I don't think I think like we're in this movement of people like women asking for more and women really trying to highlight and help support other women to help other women get the recognition that they deserve. But I think like another equal part of that, which is really hard to talk about sometimes, is like how do you as a woman who is really trying to get more recognition for yourself and your own performances, how do you balance those own asks and your own self-worth with also supporting your competitors and pushing your competitors forward, especially in a space when we're talking about like sponsorship or like race recognition or money to travel to races and stuff that like we know that there's limited access to. And there's also like you know you're competing with these women, but at the same time you want to be able to support them. And I think like I you know I think like it's really important to support your competitors during races and before races and after. Like of course like that's, I think a lot of us do that really well, but I also think like there's just this like tricky side of balancing your own emotions and I guess maybe jealousy too about how do you handle those kinds of tricky moments, especially as you're like trying to maybe enter the sport or enter the sport in a more serious way, and other people are getting coverage for their race and you're not, like I think that's just really tricky. And I don't think a lot of us are talking about that, but I know that myself, especially when I was getting started in the sport, and you kind of asked about this with like how was it getting sponsorship, and that was something that I really struggled with. And I don't know, like I don't really know what the answer is for it, because I think there's some people that are just able, like I have some friends like this who are just so able to open up and be wholly supportive of everyone and just promote people all the time, kind of
Mhm,
like and put themselves to the sideline. And I think that that's
mhm,
great, but I don't think everyone is capable of doing that maybe in the same wholehearted sense, because I know personally like I also am trying not to put myself on the sideline because I've done that for so long. And so I'm trying now to
yeah.
find a way to like how do I, how do we as women support each other while also dealing with knowing that okay, sometimes supporting someone else means you're not getting that, that sponsorship, or you're not getting that race money or something.
Yeah, and that's what's really tough is because, yeah, I think we're all almost competing for, you know, even when we're talking about sponsorships, it's limited spots, especially when compared to the number of sponsored male runners that are out there. So for sure, I mean, I've experienced this many times about that definitely that darker side of sponsorship, and you know, of wanting to support other and be a good role model and support other women, but then also feeling at the same time like, but I don't want to jeopardize my position or anything like this. But and it's a hard balance to strike, and I agree with you. There are some people who can do it super well, and I mean, I think of like people in the running community like Emma Coburn, like, you know, her and all the like boss ladies that she trains with. But I'm, you know, like they're you know, building each other up, and I think honestly, when I think about it, like you know, I love it on the start line how I can like hug my competitors and like support them, but then like during a race, like you want to kick each other's asses, like you want
Mhm.
to do you can. And I think it's that delicate balance, just like, you know, how the boys do it. But it's like, you know, don't hold grudges. It's like, you know, you one bad performance or one great performance like doesn't define you. But I think it's like we can get sucked into this circle of like only concerned about ourselves, and that in fact is not what is going to make the sport better as a whole.
Mhm.
um my coach actually, he says this to me, especially for like, you know, training with other strong training partners, like so I, you know, in Boulder, Colorado, you know, a lot of my training partners have been men over the years, but like in Boulder there's all these strong women, and so my coach was like, yeah, steel strap and steel hill, like you're racing against these ladies, go train with them too. And I think it can be like this really cool thing, and that's kind of what I've kind of settled on as a way for to like women supporting other women, is like to check myself, like, okay, like maybe some days I can feel a little bit like hurt or like meh, like mad if like, you know, I'm feeling like I'm not getting recognized, but it's also just like, okay, like also understand that building someone else up and celebrating their accomplishments does not take away from your own. And in fact, it's bettering the community as a whole.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Totally agree that like the more that we can, you know, support and highlight each other's accomplishments, the more it builds women's running up in general, and like that's good for all of us for what we're all trying to accomplish.
this is a goal of mine that I have, is like coming up with these like cool expeditions or just projects in general, whether they're like training for a race or just an adventure in general, but to have a strong woman partner with me. And I think to end, because you know, I could talk to you all day about this stuff. I wanted to ask you about this project that you did. It was called the Infinity Loop, and you did it with a female partner. And yeah, I think that was like, not only was it just such a badass loop in general, like there are hardly any just only female groups kind of doing big adventures in the mountains. And I think this is something to kind of like that everyone I think can like kind of, you know, like relate to, and like if they're looking for ways to change and like move forward, like this is the way to do it. Like get out there and like, you know, pick another badass lady to get out there with you.
Yeah, totally. So this the infinity loop, so just because most people probably don't know what it is, it's a route in Washington state that goes around Mount Rainier. So a lot of runners have probably heard of the Wonderland Trail, which is a pretty popular FKT route, and that's a 93-ish mile route that circumnavigates Mount Rainier, which is the highest point in Washington. It's a huge volcano, and the route itself goes over all the way around Mount Rainier, and also includes two summits up and over of the volcano, which is pretty technical terrain. It's all glaciated, and so you're bringing up ropes and mountaineering gear for that, and kind of navigating through crevasses and stuff. So it ends up totaling to be about 140, 150 miles, and oh boy, something like 40,000 feet of elevation gain. So it's a pretty gnarly route, and it involves obviously like running the trail itself. So it's like 100 miles of running plus then these two technical mountaineering summits and descents. And so um, first of all, like I've been mountaineering actually for longer than I've been trail running. And I
Mhm.
wouldn't say I'm a super hardcore mountaineer by any means, but I definitely really love it. And that's kind of been something that like I really I've been wanting to dive more into. And in the past years, I've tended to focus a lot of my spring, which would normally be a lot of mountaineering time, into training for races. And so, anyways, it's something I really want to kind of focus more time on personally. But I've only ever gone up on mountaineering trips with men before, and this started with a lot of groups of friends, and they're awesome guys, and I love them, and they're really supportive of me, and help make me feel have helped make me feel like a really integrated member of the team. And also, then as I got more experience, and my husband and I started doing more things together, we actually have done, I'd say, like most of the routes that we've done in the last few years have just been the two of us, and so then it's just kind of like a teamwork of our little duo. So this was really the first time that I have done any real technical stuff with another female. And I just like feel like there's so like eye-opening to go through this whole experience with my friend
Yeah.
Alex. And I think a lot of things a lot of reasons why, like, I think until you're put in a position where you are suddenly forced to really like look at your faults and your dependencies, you maybe don't really know that they're there. And I found that this was kind of true for myself of going through all this stuff with Alex. Like, I think naturally I just default to asking for a second opinion from my husband a lot about like, hey, what do you think I should bring? What rope should we bring? What should we do for this? And even though I know the answer and I know I can make that decision myself, I tend to just like look for approval, and that is no fault on him. I think it's just something that like I just do, and I think maybe a lot of
Yeah.
us do. And even with like kind of decision making, like I've led a lot of our trips up up mountains and stuff. But I think also just having that kind of support that is there. Um, Doing it with Alex, like we went through the entire preparation, planning, logistics. We did this as a self-supported thing with gear drops and things, and like her husband, I think, was out of town on a work trip that time, and the week before we did the trip, my husband Ellie was super busy with work, and so he just wasn't really home that much during that week. So really, like,
Mhm.
all of it was just the two of us coming up with, and like I think it was such a powerful experience to go through that and realize like I can do this, and also like we are like capable of leading these things and supporting each other and pushing each other in different ways that I think is not really possible, and like pushing each other on the decision making. And I don't know, like it was really really cool. And I think like through that, like I definitely grew a lot as a person, and also came out of it with this really amazing friendship with a friend who I was close with before, but I think now it's like it seems like we almost became sisters on this trip, and you spend so much time with somebody, and you're really making pretty serious decisions. So I think like that was a really cool experience. And like also, while we were out up on Mount Rainier, I think we saw like barely any women. And every time, which is not abnormal, like when I've gone up there before, I might see like three other women and like 50 other men, or how, it depends if you're on the weekend or not. But every time we saw another woman, we gave them a high five, and we're just like, you're awesome. And I
Yeah.
think like a lot of people were pretty shocked. Not so much on the trail, because I think trails tend to have a lot more, or at least like,
Mm.
we spent the whole podcast really talking about how it's starting to be more inclusive, and there's starting to be more women and stuff getting out and doing these kinds of adventures. But definitely once you
Mhm.
get up to, more technical mountaineering, I think there's the numbers drop a lot. And there
Yeah.
were quite a few groups that, were either really, really supportive when they saw that there were two women coming up behind them. And especially when we told them what we were doing, I think they were stoked. But there were also a lot of people who were really hesitant to let us pass them, or
Mhm.
kind of maybe not the most encouraging, because we were women. And I think like I don't know. I think that that's something that will take time to change, but I also just think that the experience of going through something big and audacious like this with another woman was really awesome, and I would encourage anyone else to do that. But I think to get there also, like, it takes inviting friends and partners and stuff onto things like this, because I think there's a little bit of a bottleneck, and women maybe who want to be doing more of these kinds of adventures but don't quite have the full skill set they need to get there, and it's going to
Mhm.
take someone else, whether it's male or female, to grab their hand and be like, hey, come do this thing with me, I'll teach you how to do it. And I think a lot of times, like, that kind of piece is missing, and it only helps perpetuate this stigma of what men and women are capable of doing.
Oh my gosh. You just like the last question that I was gonna ask you to end this is like what is your advice to, I mean the next generation of women or, women who are just getting into trail running right now? Like do you have any advice for those women who are training hard, like they're super excited about the sport and they want to see where it can take them?
Yeah, I think probably most of us have goals and dreams, and even like maybe like bucket list things that we want to do, but we're kind of afraid to go for, or tell other people that we want to do, because we're not really sure if it's possible, or we think maybe it's a little bit crazy. And I think I've been doing that to myself for years, and little by little, I'm starting to check those things off and starting to learn that it's not crazy. And actually, like, you can go for those things. And so I think, like, the first step towards a lot of this is just listening to your gut and trusting yourself and being bold. And then after that, going for asking for help, finding other friends to go out with, getting the resources and stuff you need to do this kind of thing. Asking, finding role models and asking them for help for things, and not being afraid of that. And I think if you are in the position, where you have people asking you, or you're trying to lead by example, and I think, like, you and I definitely am going to try to do this more, like, be open to helping people and sharing advice with people, and just trying to do the best that I can do to help provide resources to get people out there and kind of break some of these stigmas a little bit more.
Oh man, I love it. And I think you're right. It's like it's yeah, it's kind of people taking responsibility and also just like being the source of like a positive encouragement. And with that, I think it can go a long way. And man, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for taking the time. I mean, I think like we had oh man, like I said, I could keep talking to you for forever about all this stuff. And I encourage those of you who don't know about the infinity loop, like look more into it. It's super gnarly. I'm like, oh man, I want to just have like a podcast interview with you about like that experience. But yeah.
There are a lot of stories, but yeah, no, we could go on forever, so we should probably cut it off here at some point.
But thank you so much, Kaytlyn. It was such a pleasure. And yes, I guess, I'll see you on the trail sometime soon.
I hope so, yeah, and thanks so much for having me on, and thanks for not being afraid to talk about some of these kind of tricky topics with me.
Absolutely. Anytime.
All right, talk to you later. Thanks.